Welcome, everyone, to this briefing brought to you by the Israel Defense and Security Forum, IDSF. In Hebrew, our name is Bitonistim. IDSF is the leading Israeli organization advocating for strong, strategic, national security-oriented policies. Our movement consists of more than 20,000 people here in Israel, including many, many reserve officers and operators from all branches of the Israel Defense establishment who believe that strong national security and staunch Zionism are necessary for Israel to be the eternal homeland of the Jewish people. Thank you, of course, to all of our many viewers for tuning in, to all of our supporters. It's a great privilege to be able to bring these briefings to you and allow us to share these important updates and analysis with you. I'm joined right now by the head of IDSF Research, Ori Sachar, who's going to do a deep dive into Iran. And it is, of course, a very timely issue. Thank you so much, Or, for joining us again. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Moshe. Thank you so much. Well, let me just tell you, I have just before we take a deep dive to Iran and the targeted killing that we saw yesterday, I just finished a meeting with a senior member of the police here somewhere between Tel Aviv and Haifa in Zichron Yaakov. I don't know if I'm sure you've been around, many of you. And it's just astounding to see how the police as an organization functioned on October 7. I think people fail to appreciate it very often. They mostly see the military, but the police and the border police underneath the police itself functioned miraculously well, not without mistakes, but they, in their actions, by placing blockades to block terrorists from advancing deeper into Israeli territory, by sending specialized troops to stand in the entrance to townships like Yad Mordechai, the kibbutz, prevented massacre, absolute massacre in Ofakim, in Sderot. They were the heroes of the day as an organization, while the IDF took maybe a few hours to prepare, while IDF troops, IDF combatants, absolutely they fought with such bravery. But as an organization, I believe they really saved the day. And maybe it's not by coincidence, because they're used to such tactical events, while the IDF thinks more strategically, and they're used to tactical events. And that's why they are really now widely recognized as the saviors of the day. I think they should be. And the police is probably the scapegoat of Israeli society. Maybe in the US too, we hear all sorts of calls against the police. I don't want to go too political here, so we'll just leave it at that. But all sorts of calls against the police also in the US, because it's always perceived as as the scapegoat, as the responsible for all deeds. It's a national sport to complain and so on. But at the end of the day, they're there for us. And you call 100 in Israel or 911 in the US, and they're there. Now we want to talk a bit about what happened yesterday in Lebanon and how this all relates to the Iranian campaign.
Can I ask a quick question on that piece before we move on? Because you brought it up. Before the war started, IDSF, we had a recruitment program to try to bring more reservists to support the police in the South. Any sense of the manpower that the police have? Meaning, on October 7th, did they find themselves grossly understaffed, or they had the manpower necessary as much as possible?
Tell you what, they had enough manpower, but it's never enough. They train to scenarios where you have 50 terrorists, class defense, top, maybe 10. And in case they avoid the military somehow, so they're there to treat these handful of terrorists, not 3,000, right? So they didn't have any of the opening, any of the, departure point. All the conditions were against them. They were outnumbered and they were under-equipped, but they fought with such... I know one of the guys in the room was very badly injured. He didn't say a word to his colleagues. He went aside so that they don't see him, wrapping himself with a bandage. And then he came back to fighting. He didn't say a word. Only 5 days later, they learned about it. So I think they are, in general, understaffed. Okay, the police in itself. There are police stations in Israel with 30% capacity. Okay, there's many people who resign and so on. But at the end of the day, whoever was there in such a chaos with nobody knew what was going on, with over 100,000 calls to to 100 to the police, where everyone in Israel who hears someone, a neighbor underground, on the street, think that there's a terrorist underground, and they need to make sense of it all. They fought exactly with such courage and tenacity that I believe they really saved the day. Now let's go to Lebanon. So, Moshe, you're with us? Just want to be sure that we're live before we move on. Moshe? All right. So, meanwhile, okay. So I'll answer all of that later, but let me focus on Lebanon for just a second. So yesterday, something happened in Beirut, and I think we should take a look from the bird's eye view beyond the targeted killing itself. But let's take a look. What I suggest we do, because yesterday, as you know, there was a targeted killing of Saleh al-Arouri, a senior official of Hamas in the heart of Beirut, in the Dakhia quarter, the Hezbollah stronghold. And I want to look at this event from a tactical point, as a turning point in the war, and as part of the Iranian campaign, because it was far beyond just killing someone in Beirut. It was a symbolic event, and we all got to learn how it happened. Well, Israel didn't claim responsibility directly, but let's first try to see how it's happened. While the sound is incredible, and I'll send you the video so you can actually hear it, because but even seeing it, watching it is enough. So basically, there was a group of senior Hamas terrorists inside an apartment in Beirut, and a surprise party. And much like Israel targeted many senior officials in the past, reportedly, there are many cases in which Israel didn't take responsibility. So let's take the mysterious targeted killings of the past. Let's take, for example, Moussaoui, well, the first Secretary General of Hezbollah in 1992, who was targeted from the air while he was driving his car. We're talking about, the commander of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad Northern Brigade, who was targeted inside his own flat in Gaza, in the heart of Gaza. A missile struck the room while his baby, who was sleeping in the adjacent room, would not hit at all. He wasn't scratched. So the missile just blew up inside the room, killed him and his wife, and the floors above and below were harmless. And so, amazing intelligence in the level that they knew how the apartment structure was built, so they know in which room to target. And here, the entire floor was hit, but the building remained standing. It's amazing. So what happened was that Saleh al-Arouri, number 2 in Hamas, senior official, as well as 5 others who were, pretty harmful themselves too, they were thankfully killed. And I'd like to speak about it as an event that is a turning point symbolically for Israel in the war. I think that let's first speak about why does it matter. Number 1, Arouri, I don't know if you know him, he was mastermind. He was, I think, the grand architect of Hamas. There are many people in Hamas who are senior officials, senior terrorists, but Arouri was a visionary. And he constructed the Lebanon to a great extent. It existed before him, but he constructed the Lebanon area of Hamas and the Judea and Samaria area of Hamas. He actually was arrested by Israel in 1992. He served around 18 years in Israeli prison. He was released in 2010. Unfortunately, Israel did a grave mistake by releasing him, releasing Sinwar. Yahya Sinwar, leader of Hamas in Gaza, was in Israeli jail. He was released in 2011 in the Shalit deal. And a year before, Arouri was just released because he finished his term. Grave mistake. And so he became really a senior official figure in Hamas. And I think he was famous for knowing how to strategically build all these areas and so on. He spent a great deal of time in Turkey when he actually directed terror attacks against Israelis. We know of Israeli Arabs and Palestinians who ventured into Turkey to go through training camps. Okay? They were equipped and they were being paid for, in some cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars, came back to Israel in order to carry out these attacks. In some cases, for example, there were members of the Hamas student associations. Okay, student associations in Palestinian universities, especially in Nablus and these areas, where they knew they were soft targets, right? And they were arrested by Israeli intelligence. But But the idea was that Arouri was a major figure. Then Turkey tried to warm up his relations with Israel. He was forced to move to Lebanon. And from Lebanon, imagine that. You find yourself in the heart of Beirut, in the Dakhla quarter, alongside Hezbollah. This is the Hezbollah quarter of Beirut, the Dakhla, right? And Iran. Everyone in the same, they're neighbors. Arouri used to meet Nasrallah. You saw all these images recently. I don't know if you did. Arouri meeting Hassan Nasrallah in his bunker in Beirut, the Secretary General of Hezbollah. He met the Iranian foreign minister. He was really the Sultan, the major figure of Hamas in Lebanon, and everyone respected him for it. And I think he managed to create this array in the last few years. It's far beyond October 7th. In the last few years, he was responsible for dozens of Israelis who were killed in Judea and Samaria and around Israel by terror attacks that he instigated. And he knew how to attract people and how to carry out and how to be the puppet master of these attacks. And I think if we're talking about, killing the great grand architect of Hamas, there was another grand architect who was killed exactly 4 years ago to the date. Today's January 3rd. 4 years ago, precisely, Qasem Soleimani was targeted, right? He was killed. The Iranian commander of the Quds Force, but let's make no mistake. Arouri is number 2. He's responsible for the Lebanon branch. Let's forget it. He was an architect and a visionary of Hamas, the whisperer in the ear. Qasem Soleimani, he was not the commander of the Quds Force and then the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, and then, reaching to the Iranian leader, Ali Khamenei, 4 or 5 levels beyond his pay grade. No, he was Qasem Soleimani. He was a major figure in Iran. He was direct advisor to the leader, and killing him was major turning point, because what they did was, okay, they always say in Hebrew, we say lekol kelev yesh ben kelev. Every so-called dog has a son, right? So anyone can replace him. So any terrorist has a deputy, right? But it doesn't always work like that, because Qasem Soleimani replacing him with Ismail Qaani, his deputy, right? So he's nice, he's a general, he's doing his job. But Qasem Soleimani was a visionary, he was a strategist. He built the whole Iranian array in the Middle East, in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Yemen, where these people now are attacking American forces, American troops in bases in Iraq and in Syria. This was the work of Qasem Soleimani. And Saleh al-Arouri, the Hamas official, was a famous name for me as an intelligence analyst. I can tell you, he gave us quite a bit of work. He was incredibly influential. And I think targeting him in the heart of Beirut, in the Dakhla, I just spoke to a general who said, great thing to have. He was targeted not in Syria, not in Qatar, not in Gaza, in Lebanon, in the Dakhla quarter of Hezbollah, where they feel it in their soft belly, as they say, where they are in their softmost spot. They know that they're never safe and they're always being watched. And if they know in what floor, in which building I'm to be found, this means a lot. And they should be felt haunted for the rest of their lives, and until they're finished. And so I think Israel did wise by not claiming responsibility, but I also think that everyone knows what's going on here and they understand the message very well. This is a part of the Israeli campaign against Hamas, but it is also a strong signal to Hezbollah, and to Hamas. It's not just killing the Hamas, and we'll finish with that. It's not just killing Hamas number 2. It's sending a strong message to Hezbollah and a strong message to Iran, saying, we know where you are, you know what you're doing, we know how to target you, and we're not afraid to do so. Israel avoided doing that in the past, not to escalate, not to drag the region into war. And I said today in the interview, the train has already left the station. We're beyond that. We're already in war. What can they do? Start a war. Where? The entire IDF is on the northern border. And we are practically conquering Gaza as we speak. So this is not the concern. The concern is what they're going to do next. Nasrallah, in 45 minutes, Nasrallah, the Hezbollah Secretary General, is giving a speech. He already threatened in the past. Killing people on Lebanese soil is a red line. We'll not tolerate this. Okay, now what are you doing, dude? What are you going to do? My hunch is that Hezbollah and Iran, well, they didn't respond in such a way to killing Qasem Soleimani, who was, the grand architect of Iran, the Iranian array in the Middle East against Israel. So and the US. So I don't know if they will risk the entire apparatus that they built in Lebanon, Iran, everywhere in the Middle East for Saleh al-Arouri to revenge his death. So they're probably going to do something tactical. I estimate that they won't open an all-out war against Israel because of that. I estimate that they won't break every, they won't drag it way too far, but I also think that we should be careful with our estimates. We had our estimates before October 7. We should be prepared to every scenario. That's what the IDF spokesperson said. I estimate that we should keep an eye out for Lebanon, and we should keep an eye out for Judea and Samaria. And this is what we should be focused on. And, so many good news in one evening. I just hope we have many more good news in the coming days, in the coming weeks, until the defeat of Hamas. Let's open up to questions.
I don't know if you said this, but do you see a direct link in the explosion at the Soleimani ceremony and the assassination up in Lebanon? Is that what you're suggesting, that those two figures are connected and therefore the events are connected?
Yeah, because let me explain. Hamas people, I listen very often actually to podcasts and panels and so on in the US. And what I'm feeling is that you're being told that Hamas exists in Gaza and the Palestinian Authority exists in Judea and Samaria, and that's it. Big mistake. Hamas exists in Gaza. In Judea and Samaria, there are hundreds, tens of thousands of Hamas supporters and affiliates and operatives in Judea and Samaria, in Ramallah, in Nablus, in Jenin. Tens of thousands. You got Hamas in Lebanon, Hamas in Egypt, and in Israeli prisons. So you got plenty of Hamas for everyone to have. And so the puppet master behind everyone is Iran. And targeting an Iranian general and targeting Saleh al-Arouri from Hamas is in direct line. Last week was Reza Moussawi, an Iranian general, who was mysteriously, expired, eliminated in Syria last week. Major IRGC figure. And so I think Israel is doing wisely by not, rubbing it, okay, to quote unquote, as in everyone knows what's going on. It's a bit like the Syria nuclear reactor. Everyone knows Israel did it. We shouldn't force Bashar al-Assad to respond. He doesn't want to respond. He knows Israel will defeat him. Let's just not force him to respond. And in that sense, it's wiser. Yeah, absolutely.
The Arouri assassination, do you think that will affect the operations of Hamas in Gaza, or is it mostly a show of power and sending those messages, or tactically on the ground?
I think that's maybe not on the ground in Gaza, although I think Arouri is a major figure in Hamas, that now Hamas is less powerful than yesterday. So for sure, the objective of this war is to defeat Hamas. Hamas is not just Gaza City and Khan Yunis and Rafah. No, Hamas is in Lebanon and is in Samaria and it is in Iran and in Qatar, of course. So defeating Hamas wherever they are. And I just hope that the next figures we'll hear about in the news are Ismail Haniya and Khalid Mash'al, who are currently in Qatar, and all those three, Yahya Sinwar, Muhammad Beth, Marwan Issa, the three leaders of Hamas in Gaza. So I think it is influential, but I also think that at the end of the day, it just sends a strong message. You'll, as a members of Hamas who are targeting Israelis and want to kill Jews, you will never be safe. As I said before, the train has already left the station. What are they going to do in Gaza? We're already conquered so much of the Gaza Strip, and the goal of the operation, the objective here of the war is to conquer the entire Gaza Strip. We're already, the show has already started, so there's nothing they could really do about it. Yeah.
Now, looking at Israel operations outside of Israel, in Lebanon, in Iran, we had a former member of the Mossad on this briefing a number of weeks ago, and I asked him a question which he wouldn't answer, which is fine. And I asked him, would Israel be able to go after people in Qatar? He wouldn't give me an answer to that, and I understand. And I'm going to ask you the same question. To what extent can the IDF in Israel, can the Mossad operate in these foreign countries, or are they limited to Lebanon? They're limited to Iran?
Okay. They have the capability, for sure. The question is, you know, the difference between being smart and being right. Right now, Israel wants to be smart, I think. Being right, meaning to go after Qatar and isolate them and sanction them and targeting, do targeted killing of all the Hamas officials there. But since we have hostages still in Gaza, what do you want? You want 110 hostages right now, or do you want to revenge Qatar? So this was, I think, the consideration. And at the end of the day, Qatar's role will be over here at some point, and we'll have to, we'll have to hold them accountable because Qatar cannot continue to play in all soccer fields. And in Hebrew, they say to dance in both weddings, but basically eat the cake and have it. It can't continue. A country of 3 million people who is, running the world in terms of, I don't know if running the world, but having a huge impact way beyond its magnitude, with all the natural gas money and investments and all these things. So what I'm hoping that's going to happen after the release of the hostages is to target and kill all the Hamas members in Qatar, to find a way to do it. The Mossad already assassinated people overseas. They know how to do it. And I would expect the United States, to be honest, it's one direction. It's not necessarily going to happen, but one direction is the United States demand Qatar to extradite all these people. And I better still from killing them in Qatar, better still is force Qatar's hand into extraditing these people to Israel, to make them stand like Adolf Eichmann in a little glass cell, make them stand in front of the victims and humiliate them, and send a strong message to the entire world that whoever messes with Israel, this is going to be your rule. You're going to stand in a little glass cell and you're going to be humiliated. And then, of course, like Adolf Eichmann, to be executed. I don't think these people need to see broad daylight anymore. These sadistic monsters, they are not worthy of this world. But I also think if we have the capacity of doing the other option, which is sending a strong message of this gonna, echo around the world, I think it's much better.
Or thank you so much for all of this. There are so many amazing questions coming in, and it's impossible to choose which questions to focus on. Thank you, of course, to all of our viewers for sending in the questions. I want to ask you a question off topic, because I see now at least 2 or so people, maybe even more than that, have asked this question. In addition to the topic right now about Iran, as you mentioned, you were in the IDF intelligence analyst. Are you able to speak a little bit about how the intelligence department within the IDF moving forward could avoid intelligence failures that potentially happened on October 7th?
I'll speak very generally because I'm still relevant to the IDF, and I don't want to. I think it will be irresponsible to go into details. Let's just put it this way. I think there's a big difference between to know and to internalize. So there are the plans of Hamas to take over townships and to conquer, to raid military bases and so on, and to attack the fence. That was pretty much known. Not in these scales, not every detail, not 3,000 people at once, not, neutralizing the cameras and all these things at once. Probably not, but they knew the plans, much like Hezbollah has plans. But to internalize that actually this can happen, I think we kind of didn't take our enemies seriously. And I think the United States lived the same moment in 9/11 when, of course, Al-Qaeda, they're just a bunch of, desert goers. What are they going to do? And then you get humiliated, like we were on October 7th, like America was on 9/11. And so I think such humiliation really is a wake-up call that forces you into action. That you always act en catastrophe, only in catastrophe, that you really are forced to leave your comfort zone, your let's say conceptual comfort zone, and think in a different way. But I think they were just, didn't think that was actually going to happen. And this will have to be investigated, of course, but I don't think that's the right time to discuss it since we're so deep in the war right now. Moshe, I can't hear you. I just can't hear you.
How about now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, amazing.
Okay, sorry about that. In terms of the Iranian people, not the leadership, is there a chance that something happens with the Iranian people in this war, in what's unfolding right now in Iran, and the people become a stronger ally of the Western world?
Yo, Moshe, it's such a great question. Yeah, you know why? Because just yesterday, I don't know if you planned this way, but it's an amazing coincidence. Just yesterday, I was in the Knesset and to the special discussion plenary about the situation in Gaza and the day after and everything else. And there were two Iranians there who are now living in London. Vahida Beheshti and his wife Martha. They are Iranian expats who live in London, and they're human rights activists, and they're very active, and they want to encourage the UK to recognize the RGC as a terrorist organization and so on. And so to listen to them in the Israeli parliament, talking to Israelis and saying, we are Israel's friends. We think the Iranian people and the Israeli people and the Muslims and Jews are friends, and we should all unite against the Iranian regime, who is our common enemy, to call them to the terrorist state, to liberate 80 million Iranians from the Iranian regime, and so we can all be, friends again, and we can all target our real enemies and so on. That was so moving to hear, and it's not the first time I hear it from Iranians. I just say, maybe to conclude, we have to, like President Reagan said, maybe trust but verify. Okay, let's not be too gullible about it. The Iranian people have gone through 40 something years of brainwashing, and they are smart people, but not everyone are the human rights activists you want to imagine. The reason the Iranian regime is still relevant is not because it's also because it's oppressing its own people, but it's also because many Iranians support the regime. I got to tell you, very honestly, many Iranians support the regime. They are believers. There are people who of faith. They are religious, and they want to have such a regime. They don't want to have a liberal democracy in the sense that we are imagining. What they have criticism toward is the economy and the way the systems are corrupt and so on. Of course, they have tons of criticism. But I don't think they want to have the Western liberal democracy that we are imagining, because there are people of faith. And I think we shouldn't forget there are many people in Iran who are not Israel's friends. But I think there's so many people to work with. Let's say if we made peace with Egypt and with the United Arab Emirates, and we know of, maybe the UAE is not a good example, but Egypt and Bahrain, maybe with its Shiite population, not everyone there are friends of Israel, Egypt especially, and Jordan especially. But you have peace between the countries. And I think the one day I hope we'll see peace between the peoples, but also between Israel and Iran. But that is such a far-fetched scenario. What will come closer maybe is for Israel to be able to befriend more with the Iranian people abroad. And to be honest, with minorities around the region, the Kurds, the Yazidis, the Christians, they're all, on Israel's side. And we should definitely consider not just the Iranian diaspora, but also minorities and peoples around the region.
Ori Yisachar, head of IDSF Research, thank you so much for joining our briefing. Thank you to all of our viewers and supporters. We will be back with you tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern time. Until then, stay safe and stay strong. Take care, everyone.